So let's talk about bar chords for a minute. Bar chords are a pain. Bar chords are hard. Bar chords are going to take you quite a long time to actually get good at and get comfortable with. So please don't be disheartened if you're trying to play these chords for ages and ages and you don't feel like you're making any progress. I promise it takes everyone ages and ages to get good at playing these chords, but if you're consistent, if you do stick with it, they will get easier. So this lesson, we're going to look at some of these bar chords specifically. We're going to look at some ways to make them a wee bit easier and then start progressing our way up to playing the full bar chords. We're going to look at ways to build up some strength in our hands, as well as go a little bit more in depth with the technique of how we play them. So let's jump right in with bar chord number 1, which is going to be F. So let's start by taking a look at our F chord. But before we do, we're going to look at just our first finger on its own. So when we're barring, what I want you to do is avoid using the soft fleshy part of your finger here, and instead I want you to use more of the hard bony part at the side of your finger. That'll give you a better contact with the strings and it'll help you apply slightly more force. It'll also hurt slightly less. So we're going to start off by just barring across 2 strings, just the B and high E string. And remember, don't want to use the soft padded bit of our finger, turn it slightly so we're onto the hard bony bit. So let's just play those 2 strings. So once you get good at that and that feels comfortable, we're going to add in an extra finger. We're going to put our second finger on the 2nd fret of the G string. And we're going to play 3 strings. Again, practice that, get comfortable with it, and then once you're happy with that, we're going to add in an extra finger. Now we're going to put our 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the D string. Now this is kind of like a little baby F chord. This is a good place to start. We want to try and get comfortable playing a chord like this before we can try and play the full 6 string chord. So for the first few months or so of your playing, if you find that when you're playing a song and an F chord comes up, you have to play this little F chord here, that's fine, that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. This is a perfectly good place to start when you're playing an F chord. But if eventually you find that this gets too easy and you're comfortable with that, we can make it slightly harder again. To make it slightly more difficult, all we need to do is move our 3rd finger 1 string towards the sky. So we're going to put it on the 3rd fret of the A string now, and we're going to put our pinky on the 3rd fret of the D string. Now we're going to play 5 strings, so the A, D, G, B and E string. This is the next level up. This is kind of like the teenager F if the last one was our baby F. This is us getting pretty close to doing the full thing. Again, this is a perfectly valid option for playing if you can't quite get the full F chord yet, but you can manage this one, that's fine. That'll get you through songs. Nothing totally wrong with that. But if you do find this is getting too easy and you want to push yourself and get up to the full F chord, all we need to do now is take our 1st finger and just move it up towards the sky so that now we're barring across all 6 strings. And again, make sure that we've got our 1st finger turned slightly out so that it's on its side and we're using the hard bony part of our finger. Okay, so now let's take a look at our B major and look at a little progression to get us comfortable with that chord. So we'll start off taking our 1st finger and putting it on the 2nd fret of the high E string, and just that fret. We're not going to bar anything quite yet. Then we're going to take our pinky, put it on the 4th fret of the B string, 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the G, and 2nd finger on the 4th fret of the D string. And we're only going to play the top 4 strings. And just like in my other chord videos, make sure that your wrist is down, make sure you're on your fingertips, and make sure your thumb is towards the sky. Now, much like the baby F chord, this baby B chord is totally fine. If you're needing to play some songs and it's got a B chord in it and you can't manage barring yet, this little 4-string version is a totally valid option. Sounds like a chord to me, nothing wrong with that. But if you do find that this gets a bit easy, you want to start pushing yourself a little bit more, all we need to do next is take our first finger and just bar it across the B and high E strings. Now that isn't going to make any difference to the sound because we're barring across a string but we're playing a higher fret on that same string, so we're going to hear the higher fret. What this aims to achieve is your ability to bar across more strings but still hear every note ringing out clearly. If you play the baby F chord and everything sounds good, and then you go to bar across 2 strings and all of a sudden you start getting these noises, this is what we want to try and avoid. So try and get comfortable barring across just those 2 strings, but have everything ringing out nice and clear. Once you get comfortable with that, just move your first finger up another string. Again, this won't make any difference to the notes you're playing, it won't alter the sound that way, but we want to make sure that we can bar across more strings and not end up losing contact with that high E string. Once you get comfortable with that, move it up another string. So now your first finger's barring across 4. And try and still hear all those strings ringing out. And then same again, once we get comfortable with that, move it up another string, so now we're barring all 5. This will alter the sound of the chord because now we're finally playing that A string. Now we're finally playing the full chord the way we're supposed to. So now let's take a look at our minor chords. So let's try and play an F minor. So for this, we're going to start off the same way we did with our F major chord. We're just going to bar across the top 2 strings. And remember, we want to have our finger turned out slightly, so we're using the bony part of our first finger. If we're comfortable with playing those 2 strings to play the F minor, all we need to do is move our first finger 1 string higher up. So now we're going to bar across the first fret on the G, B and E strings. Once we get comfortable with that, we just need to add in 1 extra finger. Now we're going to take our 3rd finger and put it on the 3rd fret of the D string and play the top 4 strings. So make sure that our 3rd finger is right up on its fingertip so we don't end up blocking the G string. And then we want to make sure that we have enough strength in our first finger to bar across those 3 strings. Now this is kind of like a baby F minor chord, and like I was saying with the baby F chord, if you ever find you're trying to play a song and this is in it, this is a totally acceptable way of playing that chord in the beginning. Nothing wrong with playing your chords like this just to get you through some songs, but of course we want to keep pushing ourselves to make sure that we can get to the full bar chord. So what's the next level up from this? Well, next step up will be to take our 3rd finger, move it 1 string towards the sky, so it's on the A string, and put our pinky on the 3rd fret of the D string. Now we're going to play 5 strings. And make sure when we do this that we don't lose the ability to play the high E string or any of the other strings that we're barring across. Once we get good at that, we can start moving our first finger up, so now we're barring across more strings. Until eventually we've got it up, barring across all 6. So for our B minor chord, we're going to do a similar thing. We're just going to have our first finger playing 1 string. We're not going to have it barring anything straight away. Then we're going to put our 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the B string, our pinky on the 4th fret of the G string, and our 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the D string. We're going to play just the top 4 strings on their own. Now this is a perfectly acceptable baby B minor chord. If you find that you need to play any songs that got a B minor in them and you can't do full bar chords yet, nothing wrong with that. Sounds like a pretty good chord to me. But if you want to keep pushing yourself so we can play full bar chords, because of course that's the end goal we want to achieve, the next step up will be to just have our first finger bar across the B and E strings. Now, same as with the B chord, this isn't going to alter the sound in any way, because when we bar across that B string, we're not going to hear any difference because we're still playing a higher fret anyway. But we do want to get used to barring across more strings and not losing the ability to press that high E string down. When that gets too easy, move your third finger up another string. When that gets too easy, move it up another string again. And then finally, when that gets too easy, we can bar across all 5 strings. And that will help us play our B minor chord. Make sure that we're still on the outside, on the bony part with that first finger. Make sure that these fingers are all right up on our fingertips, and make sure that our wrist stays down low, just the same as with every other chord that we've played up until this point. Next chord we're going to do is our F7 chord. This is going to follow pretty much the same pattern as all the other bar chords we've done up to this point. So we'll start off by just barring across 2 strings. So that's the B and high E string at the first fret. Once we get comfortable with that, we're just going to add in 1 extra finger. So we're going to add in our second finger onto the second fret of the G string. Make sure we're right up on our fingertip. And we're just going to play 3 strings. Now once you get comfortable with that, and that seems easy, now we're going to have to start moving our first finger up. So now we're going to move our first finger up so it bars across 4 strings. So it's going to be barring across the D, G, B and high E strings. And we want to get comfortable at playing that. Once we get good at that, now we can add in another finger. Gonna add our third finger onto the 3rd fret of the A string. And then finally, once we get comfortable with that, we can start adding in the low E string by barring across all 6 strings with our first finger. So I just want to reiterate for you, the thing about bar chords is that it's as much a thing about strength as it is about technique. You can be putting your hand in exactly the right place and positioning everything perfectly, but if you don't have the strength in your hand yet to be able to press down on all those strings, then you just don't have the strength in your hand yet to press down on all those strings. You wouldn't go into the gym and just walk up to a bench and instantly expect to be able to bench 100 kilograms. You have to build the strength and you have to get there over time, and bar chords are the exact same. The more you do it, the stronger your hand will get and the easier they are going to feel. So like I keep saying, please stick with it, please be consistent, and with practice they will get better, I promise.